All right, so there is the countdown right there. 1 day, 6 hours, 8 minutes, and counting until the 2025 NFL draft is kicked off at Lambeau Field. I am super pumped. I cannot wait. I'm going to be doing a live draft here on this channel. Would love to see you guys join this channel. Hop on there, leave your comments. Let me know as the draft unveils. Who knows? Are the Packers going to trade up? Are they going to trade back? Who are they going to select with their pick? When they pick, it's going to be super exciting. Would love to get your reaction as it breaks down. So, speaking of which, okay, are the Packers looking for a last minute trade? Because there's a lot of rumors out there. Of course, we all know it surrounds Jaire Alexander and his future with the Packers. It says right here in this article, Packers face defensive dilemma as Jaire Alexander's future hangs in the balance, and Maxwell Harrison emerges as a top prospect of one of the corners out there in this year's draft. Okay, so we're going to talk about that here in a second. And then there's also another rumor that the Baltimore Ravens are eyeing Jaire Alexander to take on his contract and all of that as they make a push for the Super Bowl. And what better player to kind of get them over the hump with their secondary issues than a player like Jaire Alexander, especially if this dude stays healthy. And this proposal by Bleacher Report, the Ravens would trade two 2025 fourth round draft picks for Jaire Alexander, who has been hindered by injuries yet remains a powerful defender when healthy. We all know that despite his costly $84 million contract, the move might bolster their defense as they try to get to the Super Bowl this upcoming year. We all know that, the window is closing for some guys there like Mark Andrews. And speaking of Mark Andrews, that's another guy that has been labeled as trade bait there. And that may free up some cap space for them to absorb a contract like Jaire Alexander. So Derrick Henry, he's not getting any younger. And we know that his window of productivity, at least dominating productivity, is going to start closing pretty quick. So they're probably looking to do something major. He's got 2 years left on his contract. Speaking of Jaire Alexander, right? So Jaire, it says right here by the numbers, Jaire Alexander has missed 10 games over the last 2 seasons. He has an 86.9 passer rating when targeted and 56.7 completion rate against him this last season. He looked super good when healthy. I think he's one of the better cornerbacks out there. Okay, so here's my take on it. Okay, so why move on from a guy like Jaire Alexander? The Packers aren't necessarily in need of the finances and the money. They rank number 11 right now in the NFL in cap space with over $32 million available. Jordan Love has made it known, hey, listen, I want this dude on the team. Of course he does, because they went out and picked up a free agent corner. And then if you got him and Jaire, side by side, this is all of a sudden a secondary that is going to be competing against some really good wide receivers in the NFC North. And their defense all of a sudden doesn't look bad at all, right? Because Jaire, again, would love to see him stay in Green Bay because you just roll those dice of, is this dude going to stay healthy? He continues to, like, 3 of the last 4 years have been not good for him health wise, and his productivity out on the football field. When healthy, he's one of the better ones in the game, in my opinion. So the Packers really have no reason to get desperate at this point in time, because we know that his stock now, if they're able to get 2 fourth round draft picks from the Baltimore Ravens in exchange for Jaire Alexander, I think that's a really good ROI at this particular point in time, especially with his health and all that looming, and the contract and all that stuff. If we're able to get 2 fourth round draft picks for Jaire, by all means, let's do it. But I don't see that happening. And if that's the case, and the Packers are able to get maybe 1 fourth round draft pick for him, I say keep on to him this year. Now, it is going to come at a cost, because they're going to have to carry $24.6 million in cap space, and that's going to climb to $27 million next year. Now, keep in mind, if the Packers were to drop him at June 1st, they would inherit $17.1 million additional to that $32 million that they already have in the cap space. But, I'm looking at this and saying, okay, there's really no big name free agents out there that the Packers really need to go out there and sign and throw some money at. There really is none. And if anybody is going to bolster that type of money that you would want, it would be Jaire Alexander of guys that are quote unquote available out there because Ramsey's going to, require a lot of money as well. Okay, so then you've got Quay Walker and Devontae White and Christian Watson all coming up on big decisions. Do the Packers pick up a fifth-year option, which is going to cost them some money? So they may need some money for that. So would you rather, leave your comments, would you rather keep Jaire Alexander on the books, hoping, rolling the dice that this dude is going to stay healthy? He certainly gives the Packers the best chance to win out there on the football field. Or would you rather see the Packers give fifth-year options to players like Devontae Wyatt, Quay Walker, and Christian Watson? Okay, so leave your comments. Let me know your thoughts there. Okay, so if it's me though, and if there's anybody that the Packers move, between now and the draft, in my opinion, it would be Romeo Doubs. Why am I saying that? Okay, so you take a look at Romeo Doubs. Now he is one of the more reliable wide receivers on the football field out there. Went out there, meaning, mentally being out there, ready to go. Now he did get suspended the one game because he didn't think he was getting targeted enough and all of that stuff. I do think he is one of the more reliable targets out there for Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur's offense. So Romeo Doubs, though, is the guy that makes sense to me because he's going to be coming up on, you're going to have to make a decision here relatively soon in the near future of, do we throw some money at this guy? Because he's one of those like tweener. Is he a number two wide receiver? He's certainly not a number one wide receiver on any team. Okay. We're going to check out some number one wide receivers here in a second, but you look at Romeo Doubs. He's a number two wide receiver, and I think he's a pretty good number two wide receiver, but he's posted 147 catches, 1,700 yards, 15 touchdowns in the 3 years. Now, he did have that one game suspension this last year, but another note when it comes to Romeo Doubs is the fact that he's had two concussions over the second half of this last season. And keep in mind, one of those was with the concussion protocol helmets, those special helmets, those padded helmets out there, and he literally just hit the ground and he went out, could barely walk on his own strength. So that is a major concern for me. And I know that the Raiders are interested. I know the Cowboys are interested in Romeo Doubs. So if the Packers are able to get a fourth round draft pick where they selected him, if they're able to get that in return for Romeo Doubs, by all means, let's go out and do something like that. I would be all on board for that, especially in this year's draft. I think the Packers could find a good wide receiver later on. But, you've got Adam Schefter out there proposing or projecting that the Packers are going to go and get that number one wide receiver. And then you've got this tweet right here by Kurt. And then he says the Packers need to do right by Jordan Love, find a game-changing wide receiver. You look at Joe Burrow, who has Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. You look at McCarthy, J.J. McCarthy in Minnesota, who has Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. You've got Jared Goff with Mahara, St. Brown, and Jameson Williams. You got Jalen Hurts with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. You got Matthew Stafford with Puka and Devontae Adams. You've got Tua with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, Caleb Williams with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze, Dak with CD, Stroud with Collins, you got Baker Mayfield with Mike Evans and Godwin. You've got Trevor Lawrence with Brian Thomas Jr., who, by the way, I think was drafted right after the Packers. Anyways, you got Drake London there with Penix, and then you've got the Giants with Malik Neighbors. You got the Steelers with Pickens and Metcalf, and the list goes on, quite frankly. And then you've got Jordan Love with what? There is no number one wide receiver out there, and nobody can make that argument yet. Now, the only one that seems capable of taking the reins on that, Jaden Reed is a great number two wide receiver. He's one of the better slot receivers in the league, in my opinion. So when you look at the Packers wide receivers, you've got a struggling Christian Watson who just can never seem to get over the injury hump. And then you've got Dontavian Wicks, who I think has the best upside to become that number one caliber wide receiver. But depends on what his hands do this year, because that dude was dropping so many passes. It seemed like he was dropping passes in his sleep last year, and that just isn't going to cut it for even a number two wide receiver on any team out there. So Dontavian Wicks, in my opinion, is the only guy on this Packer roster that could take the leap for a number one caliber type wide receiver. But there's got to be a ton of changes that I see out of him. He reminds me a lot of a younger Devontae Adams. So we'll see what happens. I want you guys to leave your comments. Let me know. I'm super pumped about the draft. I hope to see you here on this channel. And as always, go Pack Go.